Hello, everyone. Welcome to the September 2012 Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group. This is our September version of this. I skipped over last month. For those of you that were sending me emails and asking, hey, where's the August study group? I played hooky for a month. The summer was over. Everybody was in transition. Everybody was back to school. I thought it might be a good month to kind of skip over that, give me a little bit of a break, but not much because it's now September and I am back and I'm ready to show you all kinds of interesting things relating to Network Plus. We're going to try some things today that I've not done before. We're going to install some things in Windows. I haven't even gone through it. I've not even tried it. I've read online how we can do this, and it's going to help you with your Network Plus. In fact, it might help you just in general. So already there's something that might be interesting to see along those lines. Let's have a look at some of the things before we get into this that help me get this to you every month. I have these absolutely free Network Plus videos. Every single minute of every single video is available for you to watch absolutely free, and I highly encourage you to do so. Why wouldn't you make all of those things available to you? If you need to take the videos offline, however, that's hard to do if you don't have an internet connection. So, of course, you could look into purchasing a version and taking it with you. The N10005, the latest version, is available if you'd like to do that. And that helps support the website. It helps support what we do with these monthly study groups. And if you want to see more about that, you go to professormesser.com/download-network plus, and you'll get 720p HD video, you'll get MP3 files, all the slides are in PDF format. You get a little more than if you were just watching online, and I think that's kind of nice as well to see that piece. If you are looking at the Network Plus certification, I'm still getting people asking me, hey, is the Network Plus, is it 004, is it 005? These are version numbers that CompTIA gives you. N10005 is the latest version. N10004 you could take up to the end of August. So really, a month ago, you could still take that version. There was an overlap because they released December the 1st of 2011. At the end of last year, they released 005. So you got about 9 months of overlap, and finally the 9 months ended. It has to end sometimes, all good things, of course. So we retired the N10004. Now the only thing available to you is the N10005. So that makes it easy. If you're planning to take your Network Plus exam anytime in the next 2 years, this will be the version that you would take. So that makes it very, very simple to be able to see that. Notice that they talk about what's new. And if you go to my website, I've got a lot of what's new in the N10004 versus 005. It's right at the top of the page. I've got links to the CompTIA exam objectives right at the top of the page. Those are two of the most frequently asked questions I get about the N10004 and 005. So those are right there at the top of the index page. If you go to Free Network Plus, freenetworkplus.com, it will also take you directly to that page. That can be a nice shortcut for you. So that makes it very, very simple. There are new questions coming on the Network Plus exam. They're really coming for A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus that will be performance-based questions. And we're going to talk a little bit more later today in the study group of what that really means. And that makes it pretty interesting if you're going to an exam and you're thinking it's all going to be multiple choice. By the end of the year, sometime in the fourth quarter of this year, they're changing things. So it's not going to be all multiple choice any longer. Now, fortunately, it doesn't look like these are going to be extremely complex. They will be very straightforward. You'll know exactly the task available to you, but I will show you places you can go and see some examples of what these performance-based questions will look like, and we'll talk about that later on in the study group. How's that for a teaser? If you already have your A+ or Network Plus or Security Plus certification, and instead of taking the next higher exam and automatically renewing your lower exam, lower certifications, you might want to collect continuing education units. And continuing education units effectively allow you to gather up these credits that then work towards renewing your exam. So if you don't want to take any other exams or get any other certifications, you can simply gather these CEUs, continuing education units. And just by watching this, you'll get a continuing education unit. We go for about about an hour or so, and that certainly counts. The description of what you need to send to CompTIA to participate and count this towards your continuing education units is on this very, very long view here. But if you go to Google and you simply type in CompTIA Continuing Education Units FAQ, Frequently Asked Questions, FAQ, you will get a PDF file, and this was pulled right from that, and it will tell you exactly what you need to do while you're watching this and afterwards to get credit for watching these. So I got a lot of questions from you this week. You've probably noticed that every time or the week before I do one of these, every single month, every time I do this, I send out a registration link. And that allows me to let you know when this is happening, but it also gives me an opportunity to have you ask me a question right in the registration. Now, of course, you can ask me questions whenever you'd like. You can send me emails. We talk in the chat room all the time on the Professor Messer website. There's a 24/7 chat right at the bottom of the page. Could not be easier to communicate back and forth. A lot of people hang out in there 24/7. I'm in there as much as I can be. I travel a lot during the week. I'm on a plane or I'm in a hotel room. Sometimes it's not as easy for me to be in there, but I try to get in there at least on the weekends and see what's going on there. That's a great place to throw out questions, and I just stick them in my Evernote. If you're not using Evernote, that's a great utility. It's a cloud-based note taking, so I can be anywhere on a phone, on a desktop, on a web. I can put in a note and it syncs to all of my devices. So I see somebody ask a question, I stick it in my Evernote. So by the end of the month, I have this big list of questions, which makes it very, very easy for me to just grab them now and stick them in here. So I try not to take the most frequently asked questions because we tend to, in previous study groups, to have covered a lot of those. I'm now trying to find things that are very specific to maybe what 2 or 3 or 4 people might be asking during the month. So let's step into some of these things and see what you asked me this month. So one of the questions, and this was a good question, goes a little bit outside the scope of Network Plus, but I think it really applies to what we're doing, is we have to know this OSI model. We have to understand OSI, and we have to understand all these 7 layers of the model, and we have to memorize. And it seems like rote memorization. In fact, this is one of the things I see all the time that people in the chat room are mentioning later on in on the bottom of the Professor Messer website, and they'll talk about, I have to remember so much for the Network Plus exam. And probably the Network Plus, you have to know more than A Plus. Security Plus is a lot of memorization, and it seems like we're just memorizing to memorize. I could look this up in a book. Well, you kind of say that for anything, couldn't you? That's sort of how things work. You have to know something that you can just pull right out of your head and stick down and use immediately, which is the purpose for knowing these things. And for Network Plus, believe me, for someone who's been in networking for a couple years, been doing networking for a little bit, we use these things all the time. So it's not like you're not going to take advantage of the things that you're learning here. They're very accurate in what they're expecting you to know. A lot of other people who know nothing about this exam often say, this exam is worthless. You have to memorize a bunch of junk that you're never going to use. They make you memorize what 10 base 5 is. I'm thinking we haven't had to know that in like 6 years. This test is constantly updated. We just updated it at the end of the year. So this is very accurate and very specific things that will help you for doing really any type of networking and whatever role you get into with IT. So the question still remains, there's this OSI model thing. I'm having to go through the process of knowing the OSI model and understanding it. So before we jump into why it's useful to you, let's go through the different parts of the OSI model. That's a better view here. You can actually see it. OSI, and if you look at my videos, this is a slide I grabbed right from the videos, but what I wanted to mention here, and the part that I find most useful to this, is that this is a guide. We call this a model, but this is not an exact match for things that you're going to find, but you'll realize very quickly, and I put in here, you're going to refer to this model for the rest of your IT career. Whether you're talking about security, whether you're talking about databases, whether you're managing servers, whether you're taking care of a data center environment, whether you're managing cabling systems, it doesn't matter. You're going to be referring back to the OSI model. This is extremely useful information to know. And as you step through the OSI model, what you're going to find is that it comes up all the time when you're talking about things. I'm going to quickly run through a couple of these examples just to give you an idea of when you might use one of these things. So layer 1, we say, is the physical layer. What we're really talking about is the signaling that's going back and forth. In some cases, we're really talking about cabling. But when somebody is trying to troubleshoot, the network is slow. My computer is slow. There's a practical problem exists with my network is slow. And one of the first things people will tell you is you try to fix the easy things first. You get on the system, you try to ping out, you ping your local gateway, you ping out to the internet, you try to see what response times you're getting. Then you start trying to see what's working inside of the network. Maybe you try a different cable. And if somebody says, I think my problem is really a layer 1 type of problem, what they're really saying is that I think we might have bad cabling or something relating to the signal getting between point A and point B is my problem. It might, because I'm able to communicate, I'm able to ping, but the response times are slow. If I'm able to ping, layer 3 is working. We'll talk about that in a moment. Layer 3, we're able to communicate. We're just not able to communicate well. So that's one of the challenges you'll run into is, well, I know what it is and I know what it isn't. And the OSI layer allows you to differentiate between all of these different methods of communication over your network. So bad cable, that's a layer 1 issue. If you're trying to talk about switching, you're usually talking about layer 2. So if you're having a problem communicating on a VLAN, if you've plugged in a system for the very first time to a switch and you're not able to talk to anything else on your subnet, you very possibly could have a layer 2 misconfiguration issue on your switch. So you can start to see we really do use these things all the time when troubleshooting. I just use layer 3 and I used it like sort of a common sense. Yes, the layer 3 we're routing, we're using IP addresses, layer 3. That's the type of value that this brings, is not you knowing it necessarily. That certainly helps because when you're troubleshooting, knowing it helps. But when you're talking to other people and you're trying to explain why the problem is working and why it isn't. And if somebody looks at you and says, well, I think your problem is a layer 1 problem. I think you have a cabling issue. And you can say, well, I just did a speed test and I got the maximum speed to our file server. Or I got the maximum speed possible out to the internet. I'm not having a cabling problem, because if I was having a layer 1 problem, everything would be bad. So you can start now putting those things in context. And they go, oh, well, if you got a full speed test out to that server, then our problem must be between these 2 connections out on the internet. Maybe it's the other server we're going to. That is a fantastic way to communicate with somebody, because we're all speaking the same language and we're all trying to communicate and troubleshoot in the same way. So the quick answer to this problem, we probably missed the quick answer to the problem, but the answer to the problem, the question that was asked was, what use does it have? That is the use it has. I work primarily in security Monday through Friday. And you can imagine with security, there are layer 3 issues. There's layer 7 issues. There's issues when you talk about encryption. You're talking about some very specific challenges relating to the different layers of the OSI model. And even plugging into a switch, I often run into problems trying to figure out why this switch connection isn't working. Someone will give me an IP address and say, plug this firewall in. Here's the IP address. We plug it in. And I'm trying to ping out from this brand new IP address that I used on this firewall, and I can't ping anything. And so I have to ask them, my layer 3 communication, I'm not pinging my local gateway. I've either got something at layer 3, something at layer 2, maybe I'm on the wrong VLAN, or this cable doesn't work. So already I'm able to differentiate and explain to them what those layers are and why it's different. So don't think that learning that OSI models will waste your time. It absolutely is not. And the more you know about it, the easier it is in your mind to compartmentalize the different aspects of networking and be able to troubleshoot that much faster. Very, very, very useful. And on the website, 4Troy4 even says that in his course that he's taken, his class, they take the IP model and they take all the protocols and they take the networking piece and they see where each one of them fits into the layers. That's a great way to do it. And that's what I do in my videos. If you go back and watch the OSI video for networking, I try to go into each layer and describe to you what that really, really means. So very, very, very useful to be able to do that. So let's also now move to something else. This is now outside the scope of OSI, the OSI model, but it's a question I get quite a bit relating to DNS. Now, DNS, obviously a foundation of what we were doing on the internet. We couldn't functionally communicate on the internet without our domain name resolutions that are occurring. And those servers that are out on the network that provide DNS are incredibly important. If we lost all of our DNS servers, we'd be in big trouble, because I'd have to remember, what's the IP address for Google again? Oh, I don't remember what that IP address is. You have to type everything manually instead of typing in google.com. That's a problem. That is not what we want to be able to do. So think about how DNS is set up, though, because to us, using DNS, we have no idea the structures of how everything works when we're sitting at a desktop, when we're sitting at a workstation. We just become so blasé about typing in www.google.com and hitting enter, and we get there. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of things happening that we have to consider. Let's take an example where none of our servers have communicated to each other. None of our DNS servers have communicated to each other. I'm doing the very first query ever. Now, in my case, I have running on my operating system something called a resolver, a DNS resolver. It is responsible for taking anything I type in as a name and resolving an IP out of it. So it's watching everything I type in. If I type in an IP address, the resolver doesn't even have to work. It's already been resolved. But if I type in google.com, the resolver says, whoa, I need to figure out what google.com. I got this, everybody. I got it. Let me send out a message to my local name server, because if you look at your IP configuration, you have to put in the IP addresses of name servers. See, that's exactly what we're doing with that data. Oh, I'll go to the IP address of that name server that I have. Here's my local name server. And I ask the server, I am looking for a particular IP address, google.com. Could you help me? Let's find professormesser.com. Can you help me, please? And the local name server, it doesn't have in its cache professormesser.com, because nobody searched for professormesser.com before on this local network, on this network that anybody uses for this name server. So the name server has no idea where professormesser.com is, has no clue. The only place it knows to go at this point is what we call the root server. And there is a series of root servers out on the internet. These are obviously, I think there's about 13 root servers, incredibly important servers. These are the servers that handle that first initial request from a DNS server. And so the local name server asks the root server, hey, I'm looking for professormesser.com. Can you help me out? And the root server says, well, you're looking for .com. I need to point you to the .com servers first so that you know where to go. And the local name server, without even talking to me, says, all right, I'm not going to tell James yet where this IP address is. First, I need to go to the .com server. Hello, .com server. Can you please tell me where professormesser.com is? And the com server says, well, I don't know exactly where that is, but looking through my list, I know the name server that is responsible for knowing where professormesser.com is. And so now I at least have a little bit more information down the line. My local name server, my local DNS server that I use, now goes to professormesser.com's name server and says, hi, I understand that you are responsible for telling and keeping track of professormesser.com. Could you please tell me that IP address? And that server says, absolutely. Here's professormesser.com's IP address for his web server. And all of this information is now sent to me. And finally, I know the IP address of professormesser.com. And at this point, all of those results, the results of where the root servers are, the results of where the .com server is, the results of where Professor Messer is, and the results of my IP address are now all cached in that local name server. If somebody comes up right afterwards, somebody else on the network who uses that same local name server and says, hey, I need to get to professormesser.com, the name server says, I got this. Nope, already cached it. I don't have to talk to the root server. I don't have to talk to the .com name server. I don't have to talk to the Professor Messer's DNS server. I've already cached this information. And the duration of the cache is something that is defined in the configuration files that we're going to look at next. So there's quite a bit involved with this. Now, obviously, if there's a .com name server, there are also a series of .org name servers. There's also a series of .net name servers, all of that process. And one of the questions in the chat room is, holy moly, that's a lot of moving parts, isn't it? Can't this be simplified? Well, no, they can't. This is the way DNS works. If you don't know where anything is located, this is the process we go through every single time. Now, the reality is most of us are going to sites that are very well-known sites. We're all going to Google. We're all going to Facebook. We're all going to Twitter. And those results are getting cached on the local name server. So in reality, you only go through that process once, and every other request after that is a simple DNS request to the local server and an immediate response from the local server. So in a way, it simplifies itself. The more you use it, the simpler it gets. It's quite nice in the way that works. That's why, by the way, if somebody says we're moving our web server to a new provider, and the new provider, we're going to have a new IP address, it may take you a couple of days before you begin using the new server because our cache timeout is a couple of days. That's because finally this cache that's on this local name server will disappear. And now you go to that website again, it's got to go through the whole process. And when it finally gets to the new process, the .com name server says, oh yeah, that name server changed. You need to go to the new name server. Here's the new name server, and then it gives you the new IP address. That's why sometimes you'll get caught sometimes when IP addresses change on servers because of that DNS caching. Although if they just tell you, just go to the IP address for a couple of days, you bypass the entire process. Another way to simplify this is just use the IP address. But it's hard to remember all those IP addresses. We rely on DNS for that. There's in the chat room, we'll put this in the notes. Matt gives this really great. GRC has a tool that helps to understand what DNS servers are fastest. This has thankfully become a lot better recently. There are some servers that you'll run into, though, that are really slow. And if you're using a slow DNS server to communicate, this local name server is very busy, and you try asking it a question, most of the time you get a response back real quick, very fast. You hardly even know what happened. But sometimes it takes a longer time. You're sitting there for 5 or 10 seconds, and it's just moving. It's just you see it circling around and thinking, and you're wondering what's going on. It's not even doing anything. It could be the DNS server's overloaded. That's one of the challenges you run into there. It's more of a higher layer issue. It's not a layer 3 issue. It's not a layer 4 issue. It's more of layer 7. It's more of an application layer problem. See how I blended in the OSI communication we talked about earlier? I'm not going to step through the details of these DNS records. There are tons of DNS records, but I want to tell you, if you were going to build your own DNS server, why these records are useful. You can go back and watch the video that has these slides on it where I go into the details of this, but I wanted to show you, if you were going to build the server yourself, what this might look like. Now, I find when I'm looking at and doing these resolutions, I have no idea really what's going on out there. One of the most popular servers that is a DNS server software is one called Bind. It is a Berkeley Internet Name Resolution program. We're going to look at this in just a moment because it's going to become very useful to us. But Bind is simply a program that you run on this machine. Sort of like when you run Apache to create a web server, Bind will create a DNS server. And there's other options as well. Bind happens to be one of the more popular ones. It's been around forever. And then you can run other manufacturers, other people have DNS type services there as well. But all the DNS configuration files tend to look exactly the same. In Windows, we're used to going in and configuring Active Directory. We're going through a bunch of windows and we're clicking on records and we're typing people's names in and we're clicking the OK button and we've created a user. Or if we're wanting to change something in a web server, there might be a graphical front end to make modifications for this. But for DNS, everything is a text file. And so this makes it very, very simple, of course, to see what's going on the server, but it makes it a little more complex because it now has to be all laid out in this text-based format. This originally was something that did not run in Windows. So this goes back to the Unix days of doing this communication. If I look through some of these things, you can see things that make sense in this. You have name servers in here, mail servers. There are machine names that are set up. So if you were looking for www.mydomain.name, you would see canonical names that would go back to mail.mydomain.name, and you could find mail.domain.name as 123.12.40.141. It's all in the configuration file. So this is what the DNS server is looking in. Our local name server is going out to the professormesser.com name server and saying, could you please give me the IP address for professormesser.com? It goes to its list. It goes through the list. It finds the IP address. There it is. And it sends back the IP address. It's all in there. And it's so simple to configure. It's just a text file. Now, this is when you also get into cases where if somebody messes up this text file, things break. You'll run into that often as well. So you have to be very careful. This is an extremely important text file. You don't want to make changes to this without some backout process, without some testing going on, because if you put in the wrong thing, it gives people the wrong answer, and then it's cached for a couple of days. You can't just make a change and everything's back to normal. That becomes a little bit more of an issue. In the chat room, 4Troy4 asks if we're configuring our computer for OpenDNS or dynamic DNS, which are two different things. Are those servers considered your local server then? Well, let's talk about specifically things like OpenDNS, where we are using the OpenDNS servers on our machine. Instead of typing in our internet service provider's DNS, maybe I'm using Google's DNS, 8.8.8.8.8, and I'm using that as my DNS configuration. Then you are exactly right. Let's back up. Now, if I'm going to 8.8.8.8, the first request I make to my quote-unquote local name server is actually at Google. So you can change your DNS to be whatever you'd like. If you go to OpenDNS, you even get a little bit more capabilities with this. OpenDNS, you make your local name server, and then you can tell OpenDNS what your IP address is, and you can start creating some limits on what you can do and where you can go. If you're trying to do content filtering, you might want to say, OpenDNS, prevent anybody from my IP address from resolving the name of a known malware site. There's a nice little security blend there with DNS, isn't it? So the DNS server itself said, oh, wait a second, you're trying to go to a site that I know to be malware. I know that it's a bad site. I'm going to pop up something on your screen that says, sorry, I'm the OpenDNS server, and you told me to keep you away from bad sites. I'm keeping you away. I'm not giving you the IP address. You can't have it. Can't go there. Sorry. And that's it. That's the end of the story. It's DNS filtering rather than doing any other type of URL filtering or anything like that. So some nice capabilities there when you're doing that piece. Yeah, the good example Matt gave was recently there was a misconfiguration with servers at GoDaddy. Originally, there were stories out that it was a denial of service attack. It was not. They just didn't do something right. You make a change that's bad, especially in an environment that's an internet service provider that is that large, that manages that many people's IP address configurations and manages the DNSs. One tiny problem can create a massive, massive issue. And they certainly ran into a number of problems as it was associated with that. Let's look now at maybe one particular kind of DNS entry so you can see what that is referring to. And I'm going to give you one that came up recently in the chat. It was for mail exchange. Now, mail exchange is something that does help you, not necessarily you directly work to transfer mail, but when you send mail out, you're sending it to a local mail server. And let's say you want to send me a message. You send me james@professormesser.com. You go to Google, maybe you're in Google Mail, you type me a message, you hit enter. Google Mail now has to know where to send that message. It's not going to my website. It's not going to my web server, www. It's going to my mail server. Now, the configuration for my mail server is somewhere in my DNS. In fact, it uses a special kind of record called an MX, a mail exchanger record. It's just a line. We call it a record, but if you look at it, it's just a line of text that's right in the configuration file. And I've configured that domain name that I have to say if anybody's sending mail, it needs to go to mail.professormesser.com. And later on in my DNS configuration that I've set up, and mine happens to be with another service provider, there is also a line that says, oh, if you need to go to mail.professormesser.com, you go to this server right here, boom, and it gives you an IP address. So there's a challenge to be able to figure that out. It all happens behind the scenes, though. You don't have to know my mail exchanger DNS or IP address. Your mail system takes care of all of that for you. This is a question that Steve asked in the chat room. So if you're on Gmail and you send a message to somebody else on Gmail, what happens with this mail exchanger? Well, at that point, mail exchanger doesn't even apply because you're not exchanging mail with another mail system. It's all self-contained. So in the case of you sending mail to people that's maybe on your same Exchange server, that's on Gmail to Gmail, that's Yahoo Mail to Yahoo Mail, any of those systems that are self-contained don't even use this mail exchange record. They simply internally send it to each other. So it simplifies things quite a bit. So if somebody comes to you and says, I can't send mail outside of our organization, to this particular domain, but I can send mail anywhere inside, and I can send mail to other places. Maybe the problem is with that mail exchange record on that mail server that's out there somewhere else that's having problems. And in the chat room, they're looking at this piece that has all of these semicolons in here. A semicolon is a comment. So anything after that is ignored by the name server application. So that's a nice place to put information in about text, about comments. So in fact, it's a great place to kind of summarize, I made this change, James made this change, it's our Linux main server, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That type of thing. It's a nice way to very simply understand what's going on with DNS, just understand behind the scenes, a lot of moving parts. And if you get the basics of that for your Network Plus, it's all you're going to need to know is how those basics work. Well, here is a little bit of a challenge when you're working with your Network Plus, because if you wanted to do some testing of name services, let me pop this up full screen so we can really see it. If you're going to test name services, you need to test Nslookup and you need to test Dig. Now, Nslookup is an application that comes with Windows. It's on Linux. It's on Mac OS X. It's practically on everything. And it's built into the operating system. You can look up names. You can look up IP addresses. You can see everything that's there, but it gives you only a limited view of what's going on. You have to type a lot of different things. It's not the easiest command line to work with, but at a very basic level, it gives you what you need. But Dig, which you also need to know about for Network Plus, Dig is a much more useful application. It gives you much more capabilities to be able to do this. If I was going to start troubleshooting DNS, I would want to start with Dig. But if you're in Windows, anybody in the chat room tried Windows before with Dig? You may have realized there's no Dig in Windows. It doesn't come with Windows. There's no Dig executable in a Windows environment. So I thought what we would do is install Dig right here in the study group. We've got some time, right? So let's do this piece. I want to be able to have this. So if you've been watching my Linux Plus certification videos, you know that there's a lot of Linux there, but for Network Plus, for A Plus, for Security Plus, not everybody's running Linux. Not everybody's running Mac OS X. So it becomes really important for Windows users, especially Windows administrators, to also be able to do these things. So I haven't done this before. Never installed Dig in a Windows environment, but I want to. So we are going to install Dig in a Windows environment. I'm going to try to make this so we're able to read it okay. I don't know that I'm going to be extremely successful in being able to do that, but we're going to give it a shot. We're going to try to make sure we can do this piece. Let me zoom up on it a little bit. I'm on a website called the Internet Systems Consortium, isc.org. This is the organization that manages Bind, the configuration of that service that we talked about regarding DNS. So for your Windows environment, you'll want to also go to this website, isc.org, and it pops you up to this piece. The first section that's on here, you can see, is downloads. They know exactly why people are coming here, and here's also a software link. Well, you can see they have DHCP, AFTR, Bind 10, there's a lot of things here. I'm just going to go to the Bind link and download it. And on this Bind link, it tells you there's a lot of things here. You can read all about Bind and what it's used for. You can see it's by far the most widely used DNS software on the internet. Well, that's exactly what we want to do. Now, I'm going to do a Windows download because I'm running Windows 7 on this device. And it says, okay, you download this? I absolutely do. In fact, it's already started downloading and it's done. It's a pretty quick download to be able to do that. So let's pop open this zip file and see what's there. I have a bunch of things in my piece for the bind. Let's change this to be a different view of the world. Now, within this zip file, notice there's a lot of things in this zip file. This is all the files. I know it's hard to read out there. I can't zoom it in my configuration that I have here, but you can see inside of the zip file is a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of executables inside of the zip file that you might be able to take advantage of. So, and you can even see inside of that is a dig.exe that's in this piece. Now, I think that's useful to know that these capabilities are there. They've already gone through the process of not just creating this bind executable. If you wanted to run name services on your computer, you can do that. But that's not what we want to do. We don't want to run our own name services on here. We simply want to be able to run the dig piece on here. So that becomes pretty useful to us then. We can take these downloads now and unzip this entire group. Let's unzip this group. I'm going to extract all of it and extract all of it to a separate folder so that we can see what's there. Now you'll notice inside of this zip file, once we do this, now we're looking at the actual files. It's the same view we had before. There are a lot of DLLs in here. I know, again, it's hard to read in this very, very tiny view that I have here. There are a lot of DLLs. And for Windows, we need those DLLs on there. And this is not a graphical program to be able to use these either. So this becomes even a little bit more of a challenge to be able to get this running. Is we have to make sure that we use exactly the right executables, exactly the right programs that are inside of this. Now, there are a number of things. If you start reading through, it tells you about what you can do with this, how it works, and they go through the process of using some of these tools and how you can set them up. So this is a great place to go if you're trying to install Dig on your computer. You've got some options now to be able to run these things. You've got a dig.exe, and you'll notice if I try to run this in Windows, nope, that's not going to work so much for you. Its side-by-side configuration is incorrect. It's not set up properly. There's another extra step we have to go through to run these configurations. And if we go to the bind install, you're going to start to see where this is coming from. There's a bind install exe that's right in this executable of this. Inside of this installer, it gives you a target directory. The target directory is Windows System 32 DNS, a service account name, but we don't want the service. We don't want to install bind. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be a name server. Well, you might if you want to do some testing, but I wanted to show you this because one of the links here says tools only. So if you zoom up on this view, and I apologize, it's so small, I can't seem to get it to zoom up for me so that you could see this. But the tools only is what you're looking to do. And if I click install, it goes through the process of installing the Visual C++ redistribute. So that's why it wasn't running. I needed the Visual C++ runtime pieces, which the install program installs for me. It installs just the tools that I need. And there's more than just Dig. There's other things in there as well. And it says the bind installation completed successfully. So yeah, the magnifying glass doesn't work. My zoom doesn't work on here. It's a limitation of this method that I'm using to send this out to you out on the internet side. So I apologize about that. So if we do a command line, and let's make this a little bit easier on everybody who's trying to watch on their tiny little screens. Let's see if I think we're pretty much up to the largest font size I can get on here. And I do a dig, notice it's not seeing anything associated with that, but I know it installed it. So let's go to that install directory where it stuck everything and see if it put the tools in there that we were expecting to see. So let's go to Windows and System 32 and DNS. And let's see if it puts something there. There is a bin directory inside of that. And inside the bin directory is Dig. We finally have a Dig. Now, what you might want to do in Windows is open up and create a path for this so you don't have to go all the way down to that directory. But now I can dig www.professormesser.com and look, Dig. Let me move it so that you can actually see it now. Dig is now working. So if you didn't have a Dig available to you before, now you have a way to go into Windows, install an executable that has already been written for you, and now you have exactly the same capabilities for that. So that's another nice thing to have available is that. So if you're watching the replay, what I'll try to do is zoom up on these things so you can see them a little better. I apologize that for those of you watching live, we'll try to make this work a little bit better in the future with some of the things it's doing. But there you go. Now you have a dig. So during your studies of Network Plus, it's really important that you know how to use Nslookup, and it's really important for you that you know how to use dig, and you'll be able to work and troubleshoot with the dig configuration, because now notice that dig on professormesser.com tells you that it has queried professormesser.com. It shows information about the information I have about the caching that is associated with this. It knows what name server is associated with this, and it's pulled out the actual IP address of professormesser.com. This is the answer for what I asked. I asked for professormesser.com, and it gave me that. So pretty useful to have that. I have a whole video on how to use an Nslookup and how to use dig. Make sure you go reference those. If you'd like to do a little more work with dig, you can do reverse lookups. You can add some other command line switches to this. A really useful utility. Very, very nice to be able to do that. So very simple to see that. Just go out to isc.org and download bind and run the installation to install just the tools, and you're up and running without having to get any services running or worry about anything else associated with that. Well, there's a lot of what we did today was focusing on being able to work in that environment with dig and with the other pieces that we have. DNS becomes a pretty important piece when we're working through troubleshooting on the Network Plus certification. So make sure you know those two utilities and how they work. And again, it's one of those situations where once you memorize them, you're going to start using this all the time when you're doing troubleshooting on your network. So it becomes very, very, very useful to be able to see that. I'm going to take a step here and take a moment and thank our sponsors. If you've ever been watching Professor Messer before, on the website, you've seen our live study groups with A+ or Network Plus, or you've actually grabbed the GTS Learning materials. This GTS Learning is an organization that makes training materials themselves. You've noticed they blended together their training books with Professor Messer videos, and they've all got it in one single place. So I'm going to pull up my GTS Learning information that I have here to make sure that I can show you an example of what this looks like, because this becomes really useful if you're trying to put it all together, because people are asking me all the time, I have a book, I have videos, the videos don't match the book. The problems that I'm having with putting all of this together is that all of these resources are in very, very different places, and it becomes a little bit of a challenge for me to be able to see that. So GTS Learning has created something called Freestyle. Freestyle is a way that I'll just log in here and I'll show it to you. We'll click the button and go right into this. Freestyle, make some more room on my screen here. We'll go maybe full screen with this. The Freestyle allows us to do something like be able to take a course like Network Plus. There are practice exams built into this that are all computer-based, so you can step through it as if you were taking the actual exam. The entire contents of every book are inside of this. You wanted to go to a certain section or do a certain thing, you can search for it or find that piece that you're looking for and find those pieces that most interest you and what you would like to do. It's all online. It's all in one place. And let me give you another example of how some of these things work as well. The GTS Learning site gives us some other options for viewing these as well. If I go into maybe I've chosen the network applications section and I want to know about name resolution, let's go to the study notes for name resolution, since that seems to be a topic that is something we were just doing. All of those fully qualified domain names, the explanations of what DNS does, how it operates, it's all right here. They took exactly the content from their book and they put it in here. Here's the troubleshooting, and built in right into the book for domain name system is the video that you can now watch that tells you all about what DNS is. It's right in here. For domain name system. And it is a process that allows us to type in the name of a server and have that server. So you've got now no searching around. You don't have to find anything. videos, exams, books, review questions after every example. Very, very, very useful. I'm impressed by this. Nobody else is doing this. I don't know why no one else is doing this. This is brilliant. This makes it so much easier to study. If you'd like to know more about what they are doing with Freestyle, they even have some free samples you can try yourself. You can go to professormesser.com/freestyle and see what it's all about and try it out for yourself. They are fantastic study materials. The people there are great to work with. If you ever have a question, they're people that I've worked with. I've gone to their office. I've sat down in meetings with them. We've attended trade shows together, a great bunch of folks. So I really like to support people like that, and they've been nice enough to also support Professor Messer. So if you're looking for some study materials or some exams like that, they're able to give you that as well. So have a look out there, professormesser.com/freestyle, and we thank them for supporting what we do here at Professor Messer. So let's go to some of the questions that I got that talk not necessarily about the content of the exam, but they talk about the exam itself. So let's have a look at some of the things you're sending me. So here is a very common question I get because there's so many different certification exams out there. Some people will tell you should absolutely take a Cisco exam. Other people will tell you, why are you not starting with the Microsoft exams? That's where you should go. Other people are saying, absolutely begin with A+ or Network Plus or Security Plus. I'm not telling you to start with any of these or not. It really is completely up to you and your path and what you want to do. But one of the questions that comes up is, if I take a Network Plus, does that really have the standing of a Cisco or a Microsoft certification? And it might be really useful to you to go out to the Microsoft website and the Cisco website and see what's available. Cisco's most popular certifications are something like the CCNA and certainly the CCIE, which is a very advanced exam. But people generally talk about taking the Cisco Certified Network Administrator, CCNA course, which talks mostly about how to administer Cisco devices, switches, and routers. And there's some networking stuck into that. Both Cisco and Microsoft have an exam that's just under that. That is an entry level. And they created it specifically to be a corollary or to compete indeed with CompTIA's Network Plus. But obviously a Cisco exam and a Microsoft exam will have very Cisco-centric and Microsoft-centric questions on there. Now, if you're working in an environment today that is very Microsoft heavy, maybe the Microsoft exam is what you want to take. The problem is that lower level Microsoft exam and that lower level Cisco exam are not as well known as Network Plus. Network Plus has this ubiquity about it. Everybody knows about Network Plus. If you're looking for a job, you might want to first go out to monster.com, dice.com, one of those sites where you can look and put your resume out there and do some searches for these exam certifications to see what people are looking for. If the type of job that you would like to go into, people are saying you really need to have these Microsoft certifications and you're seeing it over and over and over again, or it's saying you really need these Cisco certifications and it's saying that over and over again, go that direction. Don't just do a certification because it seems like that's what everybody else is doing. And I'm saying this not as somebody who has certifications, because I have a Network Plus you can watch online. I don't have the lower level Microsoft and the lower level Cisco, but if that makes sense for you, please go take that one. That's the whole idea, is you should do what makes you comfortable, what you're happy doing. You're going to be doing IT for a very long time. You should certainly find a part of IT that you really enjoy. So think about that when you're trying to determine what you're able to do. Now, I will tell you that I've looked at the Cisco and the Microsoft network certification exams that are the entry level for them, and the content is practically identical to the Network Plus. The differences are, for Cisco, you have to know how to type Cisco type commands. For Microsoft, you have to know how to do Microsoft exam or Microsoft command line commands. So that is one of the things to think about, is that once you take a Cisco or a Microsoft, you're kind of now put into a category for those things. Whereas Network Plus is completely open and agnostic in that degree that there's no Cisco specific things in there. There's no Microsoft specific things in there other than maybe common protocols and technologies that are used there. But you don't have to know command line things that are specific to those. We just did an Nslookup and we did a dig. You can do those on anything. You can do it on Microsoft. You can do them indeed on a number of Cisco iOS type devices. You can do them in Linux. You can run them in Mac OS X. As long as you know that command, you can now run it anywhere. And that's the point of the Network Plus, is that it's a type of technology that no matter what direction you go, because you'll probably go Microsoft or Cisco or Linux or databases or whatever it happens to be, whatever you choose, this is information you can use. So one of the questions in the chat room was that, so after I've done Network Plus, can I do Security Plus? If that's what you want, if that's what you'd like to do. It's the same question you should be asking every time you're ready to take a certification. Is this something that's going to get me a job? Is it going to help me in the job that I'm doing today and maybe go into a different part of my career and extend what I'm doing? Or is it something I just would like to know because it really interests me? I started out doing corporate help desk. I really started out at a delivering cables at a computer store. So from there, literally doing hard drive upgrades to systems, went from there and moved into looking at and moving into a corporate environment and working in the corporate help desk. And then from there, I got an interest in networking and an interest in Windows, and I started combining those things together. I knew nothing about Windows when I started, very little. When I started with that, Windows 3.1 had just come out. I thought, well, there's something new to learn. That's a really good opportunity, by the way. When you first see a technology that first hits, Windows 8, brand new version of Mac OS, brand new Linux technologies, that is an opportunity. Because if you dive into that and you suddenly know more than anybody else in the organization, you become very valuable. And the organization wants your help now with what they're doing. So if your environment needs more security people, absolutely take Security Plus. I took Security Plus first. While I was working in security, the first CompTIA exam I took was Security Plus. Then I took Network Plus, networking obviously very important in security. Then I took A+. I did it backwards to what anybody says to do. So there's no rhyme or reason to this. It's whatever makes sense for the path you're on. So think about that piece as well. So along those same lines, let's compare this then, because a lot of people will compare the Network Plus to Cisco's Network Administrator. And these are two similar exams in that a lot of the underlying networking technology foundation is included in both of those exams. But there are things that are in Network Plus that are not in CCNA. There are things in CCNA that go much deeper and in much more detail than Network Plus. And as I mentioned before, CCNA, there's a test below CCNA, and I don't even remember what the name of it is offhand. It's not a very popular exam, but it's Cisco's entry-level networking exam. That is the corollary to Network Plus. So right here, when you say how useful is Network Plus compared to the CCNA, this really is a situation where you are comparing apples and oranges. These are very, very different exams in their approach, and they're very, very different exams in the content. CCNA is a lot of detail. You do some subnetting in Network Plus, you know everything about subnetting in CCNA. You do a little bit about how routers work in Network Plus. You configure routers in CCNA. You learn a little bit about how VLANs and switches communicate in Network Plus. In CCNA, you are at the command line of a Cisco switch and you are configuring a VLAN and setting up trunks. So there's a big difference there. There's a chasm of difference between those two. So if you're thinking of doing CCNA, and you want to be very good with the foundation of what you're doing, you really want to know when somebody talks to you about subnetting that you know what they're talking about. Maybe Network Plus is a better choice to start with. Maybe the entry-level Cisco networking is a better choice to start with. I tend to lean towards the certifications people want to see on my resume or on my CV, and the Network Plus is a very popular one of those. If you know that you're already in an environment that does all Cisco all the time, maybe you want to do the Cisco because internally within your company, getting a Cisco certification is more valuable than the Network Plus certification. Maybe if you're in a Microsoft environment, getting the Microsoft certification is much more valuable and learning Microsoft's way of doing things. So I really can't compare. Thank you, CCENT. The chat room, my second brain has told me, Joel says CCENT is the entry level of the CCNA. So there's the corollary. This really should be how useful is the Network Plus compared to the CCENT. That would be an apples to apples comparison. This is not, so don't get caught in that. People will tell you should just do all Cisco. Do all Cisco. Everybody has Cisco. There you go. Cisco has about 50% of the routing market, about 65% of the switching market. I may have reversed those, but Cisco doesn't have the entire market. You're going to go into environments where nope, there's no Cisco anywhere. You look around, where's all the Cisco equipment? We don't have any. We don't do that. We don't do Cisco. Yeah, that's the way it usually works. You buy a certain vendor's product and you stay with that vendor for a lot of reasons. But Cisco obviously has the vast lion's share of the market, and people will say, just go with the lion's share. But it's up to where you are and what you're doing. So don't get blinded by the number one is Microsoft, the number one is Cisco. In fact, if you're talking about maximizing the revenue that you make, maximizing the money that you're going to make, knowing the things that are not the most popular are often the most valuable. So think about that. And I mentioned this specifically regarding Linux. If you look at what a Linux administrator can make versus a Microsoft administrator, the differences in base pay are dramatically different because there's fewer people that know Linux. Now that's changing every day. You're seeing more and more people do Linux out there. But getting into a segment of the market that is not number one can often be a better solution if the opportunities are available for you. Now, if you're living out in a very rural part of the United States where you don't run into a lot of Linux, then obviously getting a Linux knowledge, a Linux background isn't going to help you very much. And I would agree with some of the comments in the chat room. If you really want to understand the differences between those, do what I do. Download the Network Plus certification exam requirements document and look at Cisco's exam requirements and just compare them. It only takes a few minutes. It's not hard to do. There's not a lot that's there. And compare those two and how they work and how they would operate between each other and what the differences are. What you'll find with the CCENT is that it's almost exactly like the Network Plus. What they've done is they don't go deep into VPN technology or some of the encryption types and methodologies used in IPsec. And instead, what they do is focus on how to configure a Cisco switch. They had to throw something out, and they do something very Cisco-centric. So figure out which one makes sense to you and go that way. I think there's a lot of the comments in the chat room are try some of those things. See what makes sense for you. Sometimes the Cisco certifications don't make sense for you. Sometimes they make absolute sense for you. I try to be very middle of the road with these things because there's some things that are great, some things that are not. Maybe you want to get a Juniper certification. Maybe you want to get a certification from HP. Maybe you want to get one from another switch manufacturer. Go do that. It makes perfect sense to do those things if that's what you're using in your environment. So let's go to another question I got that came in. What is the most important aspect to study for test? I think I may have typed that in, Zoe, wrong. But for the test, for the Network Plus test, most specifically. The Network Plus exam has a lot of things in it. There is a lot of content in those pieces. And there is really, I can't even point to one specific thing. What I want to say is that the Network Plus exam is very broad. There are a lot of things you have to know, but don't focus in on any one thing. Whenever I do these study groups, I probably get a whole spreadsheet worth of questions that you send me. I would probably say every month, the vast majority of them are, what is the one thing I should study? And how do I do subnetting? How do I do IP subnets and that type of thing? And I will tell you, there is not just one thing you should know. You should know all of this. There's not one thing you should focus on because the test doesn't focus on anything. And I say that specifically relating to IP subnetting. A lot of people work, and I've seen this in my chat room. I've seen this with emails. I see this all the time. People will spend days, in some cases weeks, trying to wrap their head around subnetting. And I got to tell you, you're wasting time. You're wasting valuable time. This section in the Network Plus certification dealing with subnetting is one in one domain out of all of those 5 different domains that are there, and it's a section of a chapter of that domain. At the very, very basic level, holy smokes, there's this tiny little itty bit of the exam is subnetting. So why are you spending weeks trying to do subnetting when you could have been spending that time studying something else? If you don't get it, just don't get it. Don't worry about it. You might get a question. You might get 2 questions about subnetting, and that's it. And now you've spent weeks trying to figure this out, when in reality, you could have been learning about the OSI model. You could have been understanding about IPsec. You could have been understanding all of these technologies dealing with the Ethernet cabling and how they operate. Those are much easier concepts to visualize and rationalize in your head. So don't waste time on any one particular thing. You're not going to be asked about any one particular thing. You're going to be asked about all of that. And if you're wondering what you should know, download the exam requirements document. There's a link at the top of the freenetworkplus.com webpage. You can go there, download the exam requirements, and know exactly what you're supposed to know for the certification exam. So keep that in mind as well, an important consideration when you are working through the Network Plus. I think that's probably, of all the things I can tell you, that is probably one of the most important ones. Well, I told you earlier as we started this, that CompTIA was starting to provide a brand new set of performance-based questions. And those performance-based questions we have not seen yet. They've not released them. They are not in the, you can't go take the test. The performance-based questions aren't part of it. They're looking to roll it out in the fourth quarter calendar year this year. So October, November, December. The rollout of that is obviously going to change the exam experience for many people. So what CompTIA has done is they have added a video to their YouTube account that goes through what you would need to know for sitting down and taking a CompTIA exam. Not just the performance-based, but for everything. How does the multiple choice work? How does the exam experience look when you start it up? And what do those performance-based questions look like? What are some of the things that you will expect to know with performance-based questions there in this video? If you go to bit.ly/exam-test, I've made you an easy link there to be able to see it. This will take you right to the CompTIA page, that video on YouTube, and you can watch that video. It's a video. It's a 15, almost a 16-minute video, and they go right into detail. The multiple choice, the performance-based, and typing things in at a command line. They show matching things on the screen. There's all kinds of new ideas they have for this, and you're going to find that it's very, very simple. It's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. It's always that fear of the unknown that we worry about. You don't have to worry about this. You're going to see this and understand, oh, okay, I understand exactly what that's about. I got you now. I understand the exam experience. No problem at all. We're going to go with that. So go to bit.ly/exam-test for a quick link that will take you right there. If you looked at my tweets or my Facebook or my Google Plus this week, then you also saw this link in one that I sent out earlier in the week. The moment I saw it, I made sure everybody could see it as well. Really, really useful. Certainly worth your time before you take your exam. Watch this video. Going to be extremely useful even right now before you go into your exam. So don't miss out on that. So we've gone through another hour of the Professor Messer Network Plus study group. If you'd like to keep track of what we're doing, perhaps not the best way to keep track, but it's certainly a way to talk back with me and communicate is via Facebook. Whenever I post something to Facebook, it does not go to everybody. Even if you've liked me, that does not guarantee that anything I post will pop up in your stream of information that goes by, but it still is a great way to see what I'm doing. If you wanted to manually go out to professormesser.com/Facebook, a good way to do it. The best way to see anything I'm doing is probably Twitter and Google Plus these days, and you can go to professormesser.com/Twitter to do that. For Google Plus, it's professormesser.com/Google Plus. And for YouTube, you can go to professormesser.com/YouTube. See how easy I make that? Just go to professormesser.com, put a slash, and then type something, and you will get to wherever that place happens to be. I also want to thank again GTS Learning. Again, if you'd like to see more about what they're doing, you can go to professormesser.com/freestyle. They also have a Network Plus book at professormesser.com/Network Plus book. So if you'd like to view any of those, very simple to go out and you go to professormesser.com/GTS Learning to see everything that they have. See how easy I make that to do? And of course, I couldn't do this without your input. You give me all of those questions every single month we go through. We did a lot of good ones today. We installed new applications. We talked about the certifications. We will do all of that again on next month. So make sure you keep track of what we're doing at professormesser.com/calendar, and I'll be sure to post them and the notices out to all of those Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus accounts as soon as we plan the next one. Thanks for joining us this month. We'll see you next month on the Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group.